Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel, Jojo Fry Rocks. Today's video is kind of a reaction video in a way, but also an introduction to a new guitar channel that I've discovered that I think deserves many more views and many more subscribers. It is another female guitar channel that is absolutely brilliant. She's called Angelina Josephine. She's been around, I think, for about 6 months, but I've only just discovered this channel very recently, and she's only got around kind of just over 500 subscribers. So clearly we need to get everyone over there watching, liking, subscribing, and all the rest of it. And also please do like this video and subscribe to this channel if you're not already, and become one of my regular friars, as you've started to call yourselves. So Angelina's channel is really cool. She's done a lot of different things, but more recently she's put out one video in particular, but a couple of others on the same theme. And funnily enough, it's something I've never really broached on this channel. Not for any particular reason, it's just something that I haven't really thought very much about, and we'll come on to maybe why that is. But she put out a video asking why there are no female guitar legends. She then had to put out a video saying, whoa, I never said there were no famous female guitarists or successful female guitarists. That's not what she's saying. So the crux of the argument is there aren't really female equivalents to the guitar legends that we all talk about all the time. And indeed, in my own personal top 5 guitar heroes, they're all male. None of those are female guitarists, even though there are loads of female guitarists that I really love, like Orianthe, for example, who is an absolute virtuoso guitarist. She didn't make it into my top 5 guitar heroes, and arguably some of those guitarists are far less skilled and talented technically on the guitar, but they're still held higher in my personal esteem than she is. So that is kind of what she's saying. She's kind of saying that when you think about very famous, very mainstream, very well-known players, and particularly very well-known solos, riffs, guitar parts, those tend to be the male guitarists that we think of, that immediately come to mind. Everyone, I think, in the Western world at least, knows that Slash is a guitar legend. He just is. Doesn't mean he's the best and greatest player in the world, because he certainly isn't. But everyone knows that opening riff to Sweet Child of Mine. You know, it's those kind of things that is what she's focusing on. And I would say she isn't wrong. She's not wrong about that. We do need to think about the reasons for that. And I think there are a few key ones, but I will come on to that. She also talks about the fact that that is damaging for potential female guitarists, girls and women who do make up quite a lot of the new player market. They make up, a substantial number of new players who buy their first guitars. But then where is the pipeline between, starting out, picking up a guitar and becoming a famous guitarist, a well-known guitarist, and then getting into that sort of top tier or S tier, as you Gen Z people like to call it.
Sup with the whack PlayStation sup? Huh? Come on, am I 19 or what?
Not that any of you Gen Z people watch my channel. And Angelina herself is a Gen Zer, given that she's only 19. So perhaps this is where I might have a slightly different experience than her, because what she's saying is, without that kind of representation, without those role models, if you can't see someone you can relate to that is similar to yourself in a certain kind of position, then it just doesn't exist for you in your mind. You don't think, yes, I could be in a band, I could play lead guitar in that band, and I could be successful musically and pursue that as a career. Now, I think there's a whole thing about, actually, is it even possible to make a career out of being a musician these days? That's a whole other argument, that's a whole other thing. But certainly, for me, when I was growing up, I did feel that there were at least a lot of female-led bands on the music scene when I was growing up. They may or may not have had female guitarists, some did, some didn't. But if you go all the way back to sort of 80s rock, which is kind of where I started out, you did have Heart, Nancy Wilson being, you know, one of the most amazing guitarists in rock, like unquestionably. You did have the band Vixen, who I did know of, you know, and I liked at the time. You did have the Runaways, and they were a girl band. They were very, very successful around, kind of the 80s. And then coming into the 90s, for me, as somebody who really liked grunge and that whole scene, you had a lot of bands that I think had come out of the sort of the more punk movement initially, the whole Riot Girl movement that was sort of coming out of the Pacific Northwest. I'm not too familiar with the music of those sort of Riot Girl bands, Bikini Kill. That wasn't sort of as of much interest to me as the more grunge bands that kind of followed that. But there were so many, right? So as much as I liked, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all those guys, I also, I really liked Hole. I like Courtney Love's music. She's a controversial figure, but she also plays guitar. You know, she is a very, very famous musician, celebrity, and she always did play guitar. She's got a signature model, a Fender signature model guitar. L7, Babes in Toyland, Veruca Salt, 7 Year Bitch, they were cool. There are so many. You know, you had The Breeders, which was led by Kim Deal from the Pixies. I mean, I know she's a bass player, but a bass is still a guitar. PJ Harvey, she played guitar and actually was from Weymouth, which is where I grew up. So I clearly sort of had a lot of role models that I could see. I was also quite familiar with some of the earlier guitar virtuosos like Jennifer Batten. Because I was a big fan of Michael Jackson, and she was Michael Jackson's lead guitarist. And Michael Jackson, in the 80s, was pretty much the most famous and most successful musician, and Jennifer Batten was his lead guitarist. She played his live shows, she played on his albums. He had many other guitarists, obviously, involved in his music, so that puts her up there with Eddie Van Halen, with Slash. So to me, it didn't seem like something that was impossible. It didn't seem like something that a girl or a woman couldn't do. Even a bit later on than that, obviously I was growing up in the UK, and in the 90s, after grunge kind of died down a little bit, even though I was still into it, we had a load of then Britpop bands that were either all female or female led. One of those being Elastica, which is actually one of my favourite bands, and I've never really talked about that on the channel, but I loved Elastica. Oh my god, Justine Frischmann.
Justine Frischmann, out of Elastica, who I used to go out with. And anyway, Elastica rubbish.
Was just the coolest person that I think I had ever seen at the time, probably still to this day. She was a level of cool that I just knew I would never achieve, but I loved them. And they were pretty much a female band. But you also had, you know, Sleeper, Echo Belly, Lush, Kaniki, The Sundays, Dubstar. How many more can I think of? Skunk Anansie, who, okay, they were not Britpop, they're a proper rock band. And, okay, there's only Skin, who's female, but nonetheless, it's a female-led band, female-fronted band. From that time, there were loads in the 90s. So, for me, I could quite easily imagine, doing music, playing guitar, and that not being something that girls or women couldn't do for any particular reason. And I never thought that that was going to be my career or anything like that, but I did want to play in bands, and so it was good to see all these role models around me at the time when I was an impressionable teenager growing up. It didn't seem at all unusual or out of the ordinary to go out and do that and play live and be in a band and play guitar. So I think I have a very slightly different take on it than Angelina has, because, as I say, as an elder millennial, I have a slightly different experience. But she's not wrong. She's not wrong in what she said. There are no female guitar legends who are on the level of, let's say, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Yngwie Malmsteen. There are no female guitarists, even someone like Orianthi, who has had a lot of success and actually has had quite a long career thus far. She hasn't sold anything close to the amount of records that Joe Satriani has. And you've got to kind of wonder a bit why that is. So there are two questions. One question is, why aren't there more female lead guitarists, or like just female instrumental guitar players? Because by and large, I think other than Jennifer Batten, I can't really think of any others that solely just play guitar in the way that someone like Joe Satriani does, for example. So why is it that they're always like also a singer? Like Orianthe is also a singer, right? Nita Strauss, she's also a singer. So why do women and girls have to also be a singer? Like, why can't they just be the lead guitarist or guitar virtuoso? So that is one question. And then I think the second question is, why, even when there are female lead guitarists, why do they not have the same level of fame? Why is it that female lead guitarists, or even, you know, very, very famous female guitar players, don't have that level of mainstream recognition? So what is it that has kind of been a barrier, you know, or what factors have been barriers to women becoming lead guitarists in bands, let's say? And I think we've got to go back to kind of the 50s and 60s, when guitar music, electric guitar music, was becoming popular. Rock and roll, obviously. And what was it about that and that time that might have made it more difficult for women to participate? And I think there are some obvious economic and social reasons, particularly in the West. So, you know, just kind of thinking about the US and the UK, where a lot of this music was coming from. And if you think about how a band like the Beatles became famous, really, it was because they did a lot of gigs and a lot of touring. They were constantly playing. They were constantly playing live, and they were constantly touring in the places where they wanted to become popular. That is a whole lifestyle, right? It's the lifestyle of a rock star. And ultimately, women and girls, particularly in the 1950s and 1960s, that just wasn't an option for them. You were not expected to do that. It was not socially really acceptable to do that. You were kind of not even expected, most of the time, to go out to work, let alone to do a job that would take you far away from your family and, you know, leave the burden of raising children to who? Because certainly not to your husband, because that wasn't the done thing. So I think there is just a really, really obvious point to make here about how that lifestyle and that particular kind of work and career was really not available to women and girls at the point where guitar-based music, and electric guitar music in particular, was taking off and becoming mainstream and popular. I think by the 70s and early 80s, then you do start to see, as I've said, you know, women in bands, or you know, women kind of choosing music as a career. And that's when we do start to see female rock bands, female guitarists coming through. So it took that whole kind of social and economic shift, that progress, to enable some of that to happen. And then by the 90s, it was becoming much more normalised. So I think that's one thing, but I also think there's another aspect to it, and that is record labels, marketing. I think that, as we all know, back in the day, so from the 50s onwards, probably right up to maybe 20 years ago, the music industry was dominated by record labels. And they would only financially support and promote and push something that they thought they could sell, something they thought they could package and market. And female vocalists, yes, they could quite easily. They could present a female vocalist, a female singer-songwriter, particularly with an acoustic guitar, you know, thinking about sort of your Janis Joplins, your Carole Kings, like right from the 60s, I think, all the way through to nowadays, where we have Taylor Swift, the most popular and successful musical artist right now in the world, who is a female singer-songwriter. She plays acoustic guitar. That is quite easy, I think, for record labels to package and sell. Particularly, you know, they will choose to back and market women who look a certain way. It's called objectification, and it's quite easy to do. Particularly, as I say, picking women and girls who are attractive and who have a nice singing voice. That is a no-brainer for a record company. So I think it's quite easy to see that that is why it's okay or deemed socially acceptable or even desirable to have a woman who sings and plays guitar and who is a singer-songwriter. Not just an instrumentalist, not just a lead guitarist. I think the other thing to say is that it's actually, I think, always been relatively normal and acceptable for women to be bass players. There are so many highly successful, brilliant female bass players in rock. And I think there is something female coded about being a bass player. So that is a support role. It's a foundational role in a band, but it's not the lead. It's not the focus. So that's not the thing that is being packaged and marketed. That is in the background. And it's okay for women to be in the background, playing that supporter, helper role. Okay? So I think that's never been a particular issue or particularly controversial. But what I think is a female lead guitarist is a much harder sell. Really, in terms of packaging a band, you think about the audience, a mainstream audience going to see a band where there's a male lead guitarist. What you have there is something that half the audience, so the male audience, can sort of relate to, because if they're into that kind of music, chances are they're also into playing guitar. They might be aspirational in terms of, you know, being in bands themselves, and they are kind of seeing a role model up there on the stage. They can kind of imagine that that's them on the stage. And they can also massively, you know, appreciate the actual playing and the talent and everything like that. But there is that sort of relatability aspect. And then there's also the appeal to the female half of the crowd, usually anyway, or it has been in, you know, decades past, particularly in the kind of music that I like, sort of 80s rock and metal, where you would have, you know, a lead guitarist who usually is also picked because of their looks as well, you know, as well as their talent playing guitar. And I think a record label would think girls and women will be impressed by this man by his playing and his hair. Or something along those lines anyway. So that's quite a nice, easy package to sell, right? The lead guitarist being a male, half the audience being attracted to them, another half the audience identifying with them. Pretty straightforward. However, it doesn't quite, I think, work in the same way if you have a female lead guitarist, because I don't think you would have as much of the female gig-going crowd kind of relating to that person, to that female guitar player. There probably aren't as many women in that crowd who play guitar themselves, or who even want to or have any aspiration to be in bands, and therefore there isn't that relatability factor there. And on the sort of objectification side, if you like, there probably aren't as many male members of that crowd that actually find it that attractive. Really? I mean, I could be wrong. I am totally making this up. This is not on the basis of any research at all. So tell me in the comments. I am probably way off here. But I just have a feeling that, certainly in my experience anyway, being a female guitarist, and particularly an attractive proposition. Most men, in my experience anyway, from my dating history or whatever, haven't actually been particularly impressed that I play the guitar at all. Maybe one or two have, but not, just, they don't really care. That's not really been a thing at all. And whenever I've played live or been in a band, I can't honestly say that loads of guys have come up to me after a gig and said, oh, you know, your guitar playing is amazing. I mean, it's not, but what I'm saying is, as a relatively attractive girl when I was younger, in my 20s, I think I would have expected a little bit more attention as the lead guitarist of a band than I actually got. So, as I say, this is purely just in my own experience, and these are just my thoughts on the subject. But I think a female lead guitarist, from a commercial perspective, from the perspective of a record company, is a much, much harder sell. And I think that's probably why they would not necessarily have picked up on bands that had one. And so you didn't see successful female lead guitarists coming through the record industry in the last, however many decades it's been, that the record labels have had that kind of stranglehold and been those gatekeepers of what music and bands are popular or not. I think now things are shifting, things are changing, because the whole music industry as we knew it has entirely collapsed, and that's good in some ways and bad in some ways. One of the good things is that anyone is now free to create music, put it out there, put it on platforms like Spotify or any of the other platforms, YouTube, Apple Music, and see if they can get any traction with it. And I think because of that, we are starting to see more, female musicians coming through, and particularly using platforms like YouTube, where you've got Mary Spender, for example, who's got an incredibly popular and successful YouTube channel. She's able to make her music, put out albums, go on tour, Not sure whether she's particularly making any money out of it. I think really she makes her living from her YouTube channel, but that's more about the music industry in general. And I think it's just incredibly hard now to be a musician and to make any money doing that. So that's kind of universal, I think. But I don't know, those are my thoughts really on the topic. The main takeaway from this video though is that you should go and watch Angelina's channel. It's really good. Go and subscribe. Let's support her and bring her into the guitar community. As always, do let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Why do you think that we don't have any legendary female guitar icons on the same level as like Joe Satriani? Why is it that you don't think that we've seen as many female lead guitarists as we have done male lead guitarists over the years? I'd be really interested to know what you think has fed into this situation. Do you think we need to do anything about it? What could we do? Or do you think, well, there's nothing we can do? Which is a little bit depressing, isn't it? So let's not leave it on that thought. Yeah, tell me in the comments, what do you think we can do to change the situation? Okay, thanks everyone. See you next time.